Welcome to The Sound of Soundtracks, starring Dave Lubin.
Welcome to the fourth episode of The Sound of Soundtracks. Good evening. My name is David Lubin. I'm your host, and returning tonight is Grant Arthur from Grant's Rock Warehouse. And we are going to be doing a deep dive into what Grant said is his favorite soundtrack, Saturday Night Fever.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Well, that and Beatles' A Hard Day's Night. Beatles Help. This is right up there. Iconic. You cannot deny. So yeah, great soundtrack. Perfect.
Well, you've given me a few good ideas there for future shows. So we're going to talk some Saturday Night Fever. It was released in 1977, sold 40 million copies worldwide,
Incredible.
16 million in the United States. It was Billboard's #1 album for 24 straight weeks. 4 songs from this album reached #1. Night Fever, Staying Alive, How Deep Is Your Love, and then also If I Can't Have You by Yvonne Elliman, but was written by the Brothers Gibb. The album was added to the National Recording Registry in the Library of Congress on March 21st, 2013 for preservation. Quite the accolades, I think.
I agree. Well deserved as far as I'm concerned.
So I'm going to ask you a trivia question.
Yes, sir.
All those accolades, all those hit songs. Now, Oscar has 2 categories for music. One is for best song. A producer has the right to put forward up to 5 songs for nomination. So, for instance, Dreamgirls back in the maybe about 15 years ago or so had about 3 or 4 nominations in the best song Oscar.
Yeah.
You can also be nominated for the best soundtrack of the year. So my trivia question to you is between song and soundtrack, how many Oscar nominations did Saturday Night Fever get for music?
Oscar nominations, not Grammy.
Just nominations. I'm not saying win.
Oh, nominations.
Yeah, just guess. So now there's 2 categories. Technically, they could have had, obviously, the soundtrack would be 1 nomination potentially. Songs, they could have had up to 5 songs nominated. So how many do you think they got?
I'm going to say probably 5 nominations.
Okay, the answer is 0.
Oh, well, they should have got something.
Saturday Night Fever did not receive a single Academy Award nomination for music. The only nomination it got was Best Actor for John Travolta, who lost to Richard Dreyfuss.
Well, they were robbed, Dave. Robbed.
So I believe, so interesting thing what happened the very next year, the best song winner was The Last Dance from Thank God It's Friday. So I think it was almost the Academy was not ready for disco to take over all their Oscar nominations. Now, just one more little tidbit. What song won? And I'm not going to ask you to guess this. The song that won best song, so it means it would have beat out all these best songs, was
in 77.
You Light Up My Life by Debbie Boone. A very
that was big.
Yeah, that was a big song. It's I think it was identified in one of your Wall Puncher shows, I believe.
It could have been.
Fair enough.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Fair enough. I don't think it's that bad. I also don't think it's that good. I think it made sense. It won the best song. It was this very bland song. It's sung very pretty by Debbie Boone, and it was the type of song that won. And I don't think until the very next year was it ready. Anyway, having said that, I want to get sort of your just some initial thoughts on, did you own the album first? Did you see the movie first? What was kind of your general experience with this album and this movie?
My general experience was, because when this was out, I couldn't stand disco. My buddy's parents had the record. They had I think a 77 Monte Carlo, and they had an 8-track player in it, and they would play this in the car. And my buddy and I just couldn't stand it. But that was then. We were anti-disco. I was a big Beatles fan. I liked disco. But I'll tell you, back in the I didn't pay much attention to it later, but in the early 90s, there was a theater in downtown Columbus that had a nice, new, fresh print. They just made a new print of Saturday Night Fever. Okay. So it's absolutely perfect. Brand new print from the negative, and they projected it. And we went there and we went to see it. And like I said, Dave, I didn't give it much thought, but I thought, yeah, I'll go see it. Maybe it's good. But to see that new print and how beautifully shot the film was, the sound, the sound was absolutely wonderful. And by listening to that with the visual and the songs, I went, oh my God, I finally got it. When I was a kid, you're a kid, you're not very mature in your listening experiences. And to really listen to this record and take it in at a later time in your life, you really realize the amount of musicianship, the production, the songwriting, the lyrical content, considering that the Bee Gees were tapped for this and they basically didn't have anything and they wrote all these songs like in half an hour or something, an hour, very quickly. And a lot of this is some of their best work. Now, it's just not all the Bee Gees on here. There are other acts, the Tramps, Casey and the Sunshine Band. But there were some new tracks on this record that were new recordings. Um, Jive Talking was included. That was an old recording. We got Walter Murphy, Fifth of Beethoven on here, which I believe was 1976. So there's some other tracks on here that were older tracks. Uh, Boogie Shoes came out on the first KC album. Um, but phenomenal, phenomenal. But the beauty of this record to me is that you could take all these tracks, put them together, and it flowed. This is some of the Bee Gees' best material. Some people may argue that, um, well, gosh, this is no Odessa. This is nothing like in that original period. Well, the Bee Gees they had to grow. They had to, for one, get hits because there was a time period in the Bee Gees catalog where they couldn't get a hit to save their life. But Staying Alive, you cannot. Well, do you want us just, I could go on and on because I absolutely love this record. I could listen to it over and over and never get tired of it. But it was one of those things, Dave, that it took years for it to grasp, and I had to mature to really understand it. If you listen to this record with all the crap that's out now, this is absolutely one of the most brilliant things you'd ever heard. But back when I was a kid, I didn't look at it that way. I mean, I'm just going to let you go if you want to go through the tracks or whatever you want to do.
Yeah, we're gonna go through the tracks. So I just basically I'll just share my experience with this.
Yeah.
So 76, 77, 78,
Hmm.
those were sort of party years in my community, and disco was played, and I didn't really have a big problem with it. But then it was around, I'm gonna say around 1978, 79, I did develop this big attitude. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna listen to disco anymore. I'm rock. I'm a rock fan and the whole thing. However, the one thing I will admit is that through that entire period, the one disco album I would still continue to listen to was side one of this album because and
Well,
it's really side one where you're going to find the original songs. But we're going to go through them and we're going to talk about them as they appear in the movie. But I never really stopped listening to this. But anyway,
okay.
let's get going on these things. We'll start off with side one. Side one starts off with "Staying Alive." So it's played in the opening credits. You meet Tony Manero, and he's doing that famous strut. And ultimately, I think that this is the song of the movie, really. I think it's the one that emerged. I think their original plan was "How Deep Is Your Love" was the one that was going to emerge as the key song of the movie. But I think there's no doubt that it's this.
Yeah, I think it's a classic track. I think how else would you want to open this? That sequence in the film where, Tony's strutting to this song is iconic. It sets the mood for the whole film. This got up to number one for 4 weeks. UK got up to number four. Come on. This, when anyone thinks disco, they think Staying Alive.
And the
It's
sequence,
iconic, catchy. The Bee Gees sound great. Come on. This is a wonderful track. And it's just iconic the way it starts the film out. It is if you need one disco song, this is it.
And the sequel was called Staying Alive, and this was the only song that made it into the sequel. So if you've seen both films, Saturday Night Fever starts with Tony strutting to Staying Alive, and Staying Alive, the movie, the sequel, finishes with him walking the streets of Brooklyn. So it's just supposed to be kind of the opening and the closing.
Yeah.
Okay, second song is How Deep Is Your Love? So where was this played in the movie? It was actually played in 3 spots. So first of all, it's played in the background. He's helping Stephanie move. Then it's played again, sort of toward the end of the movie. He's on the subway going to Stephanie. He feels bad because how he behaved the night before. And again, because we're going through song by song, we're hitting scenes at different times. So the evening before, he kind of forced herself to kiss her. She got upset. She ran off, and then he and his friends got into some pretty awful hijinks. He realizes that his friend that he's got to change his behaviors, and then it was finally also played in the closing credits. So as I said, I think that originally the thinking was that this was going to be kind of the love theme song of the movie. There's a problem though. This is not a romance movie by any stretch of the imagination. This movie really is a triangle, because the fact is that he likes Stephanie, Tony likes Stephanie, and she ain't interested in him. Annette likes Tony, and he ain't interested in her. And in the end, no one ends up getting together with anybody. So it is not a love story. This movie actually is a character study. So that's How Deep Is Your Love? Any thoughts about this one?
I There's not a track on here I don't like. I think this is great. This was released prior to the soundtrack. And I think that was done because I think that they thought this was going to be the major song. Yeah, it is one of the major songs out of an album full of major songs. But this on the Hot 100, this got to number 3, or actually got to number 1 for 3 weeks. So it was very successful. You could not escape this track. But I mean, it's a softer romantic ballad. It's a kind of a contrast to the disco tracks that are on here. It's still a disco song, but oh, it's wonderful. This actually won a Grammy for best pop, I think best pop performance by a duo or a group. So it was a big deal. And I think it's very well deserved, a Grammy for this track during this era, even though it didn't get anything with the Oscars, but as a Grammy, come on. This is a wonderful track. It
did
still
get nominated.
stands up.
It did get nominated for a Golden Globe, by the way.
Okay.
So the Golden Globes did nominate. It did not win.
At least it won a Grammy.
It won the Grammy Award because, well, I mean, everything about these songs are, I mean, they're the production on them is fantastic. The Bee Gees. I mean, what do the Bee Gees do? They harmonize, and their harmonies are perfect. Actually, I'm gonna skip ahead and go back, because I just want to go back to a point I just brought up about this particular song. So I said it's the love song in the movie. The problem is it's not a successful romantic film in terms of its plot, that nobody ends up with anyone. And actually, a song that more represents what's going on in terms of the love story or lack of is probably the one that Yvonne Elliman sings. That's If I Can't Have You, because this one is played over. You see Annette trying to talk to Tony, and she's trying to get him to dance with him, and he's telling her, "Hey, okay, we can dance together, but we ain't going to be dating." And then it's also heard on another part in the movie, and it's Tony is walking Stephanie back after they've been practicing, and again you hear that over the background because he ain't going to end up with her. So I just kind of find it funny that this is probably the better representation of that aspect of the movie, or that plot.
Yeah, this was also released as a single March of 78, got to number 1 on the chart. Bee Gees wrote it, the Barry Gibb song, and they did do a version of it. Is it on? Well, Tavares, More Than a Woman's on here, but I do believe they put out a best of album like in 1980. I can't remember exactly, but I think the Bee Gees version's on there. And essentially it's the same song, only, they wipe the mix the Bee Gees out of it as far as Barry's lead vocal and put Yvonne Element on there. It's just as great. Either one. I love both. It's such a good song, and it just goes to show you that the Bee Gees were on fire. Give
when the
them a
Bee
task and they just crank these songs out and they're all top notch.
when the Bee Gees write hits for other people, they have no problem going and recording those same songs. So they did that with
Yeah.
Andy Gibb with oh no, I'm drawing a blank on the song, but they also did that with Islands in the Stream.
Mhm.
They've done they did that for Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton, but they
And there's
also
a
did their
Bee
own
Gees
version of it.
version,
Yeah,
which is
there is a
awesome.
yeah. Oh, it's a great version. No, the oh,
Dave, a great song is a great song.
I'm trying to think. What is that Andy Gibb song I'm thinking of? There's one song that
It's like on Shadow Dancing.
yeah, but it's not Shadow Dancing. It's another one
No,
they
but
wrote for him, and oh,
it's
I'm
a
drawing a
slow
blank.
song.
Anyway,
That's all
they
right. It'll come to
yeah.
you.
All right, it'll come to me later. Anyway, all right, let's go to Night Fever.
Hmm.
So we see this song played multiple times. Actually, there's a great scene. The first time you see Night Fever being played, he's getting ready to go to the disco, and I mean, it was so representative of the era. He's got the blow dryer out. He's blow drying his hair. They're showing posters of Farrah Fawcett. They've also got a poster, ironically enough, of Rocky. Why is that ironic? Because who directed the sequel? Sly Stallone. And then the first time they go to the disco, they show a line dancing scene. So he and Annette are both line dancing to Night Fever, and basically that first disco scene, it basically establishes that Tony is the king of that particular nightclub.
Hmm.
So that's Night Fever, and that was another number one song.
Yeah, was it number one for 8 weeks? Big, big hit. It's again one of the best songs on the record. There's tons. It's a great record with a lot of great songs, and it also defines that disco era. When you think about it, the track Night Fever, if that doesn't say disco, I don't know what does. But it's got a smooth groove, infectious melody. It's come on, the Bee Gees were on fire. Like I said, hit the top of the Billboard charts. And this pretty much established them as disco icons. This kind of set them in stone as far as these are the guys. This is the band, you know? But infectious, great melody. It's wonderful. All right.
I
I love it.
I think that one might be my favorite song on the album. It's
Mhm.
between that one and More Than a Woman, which we're going to
Yeah,
talk about.
mine's How Deep Is Your Love. That's my favorite.
Yeah, well, probably those three for me. Well, also,
Mhm.
actually, I quite like the Tramps too, what the Disco Inferno song too. But I think I think I would pick Night Fever as my favorite. All right, let's move on to More Than a Woman. So we're actually going to talk about a few songs together here because it's
Mhm.
significant to the movie. So first of all, More Than a Woman has two versions. So there's a
Mhm.
Tavares version when Stephanie and Tony are practicing, and then when they actually do their performance in the contest, that you hear the Bee Gees version.
Yeah.
Now, the other contest songs, I'm going to bring this up because I want to have a little conversation about this, is there was a song called KG by MFSB. So that was the one performed by the Latin couple. And then Open Sesame by Kool and the Gang was the one performed by the African American couple. You saw, so I think the concept of the in the movie was disco had different styles depending on the culture. I believe that's where they were going with that.
Mhm.
So um I guess my first question to you is which More Than a Woman version did you prefer, Tavares or Bee Gees?
Me personally, because the Bee Gees wrote it, I prefer the Bee Gees version, but they're both very similar. I mean, there's really not. Travaris didn't really stray that far away from the Bee Gees version. But, I don't know what the reasoning was behind that because the Bee Gees version was primarily featured in the film, but the Tavares version was released as a single. They're both smooth, both romantic disco tracks. I mean, they're both wonderful, but I don't know why the Bee Gees, well, both versions are on here for one.
I
But what was the idea with the Tavares version? Why was Tavares? I don't have any idea. Why is this version even here? It's fine, but I don't.
I think because when they were actually practicing, they were playing the Tavares version. So when they were practicing,
Okay.
they were doing it just like this in a dance studio, and it didn't have all the look of the disco ball and the lighted
Mm-hmm.
floors. So I think I believe it was to provide the contrast of them practicing versus the Tavares version is more of a soul disco version of it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a little more crass. And then when they actually get to perform the song and they've got all the special effects of the disco behind it,
You
it
got the Bee
I
Gees
believe
version.
it was to create effect.
Got it. Well, this only got up to 32, so it wasn't that big of a hit, but
No,
it's fine.
well, okay. So I'm going to tell you an interesting story behind this. These songs were actually written after the movie was produced. So in a lot of cases, they are not actually dancing to this original music. So what song are they dancing to in More Than a Woman? They are actually dancing to the song "Low Down" by Boz Scaggs. This was something I did not know until I was preparing for the show. And I do find that really interesting because I don't even think of "Low Down" as being a disco song at all. But they
But you
didn't
could
get up.
dance to it. It's got a great beat.
It you can dance to it, but it's a disco movie. I just
I
was
know.
so
Yeah.
I don't think of it anyway. Apparently, they didn't get publishing rights. So my next question is that we know that the story is that he and Stephanie win the contest. However, he doesn't feel they won the contest, and he then subsequently gives his prize and his trophy to the Latin couple. Who do
Mhm.
you think won the contest?
Oh, well, the Latin couple. Well, that's a good. I don't know. I'd have to go and re. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but I thought the Latin couple were just fine. I don't
I,
know. I kind of agree with it.
I fully agreed with Tony. I actually and what's interesting is that I found out just while preparing for the show that they weren't actually dancing to it, and I always thought that was the one number that they were. It was a little bit off. The dancing was nice, but something never looked quite right in that number when I when when
Hmm.
when I watched them do that performance. And I'm wondering maybe that's what it was, or maybe you were supposed to feel as the audience, no, he did some outstanding dancing, and we're going to get to that, and
Hmm.
some of these other scenes. That one, I felt that actually of the three, they were the third best. So, and I think again, I think what they were trying to establish there is that given where the club was, who took up the bulk, what culture took up the bulk of the club, and also based on it's a somewhat of a popularity contest.
Hmm.
Hence, Tony won because he was the king of that particular disco. But I think for the audience, you were also supposed to feel that no, he didn't really win that.
Right.
So
No, I don't. Yeah. Now that I think of it, the Latin couple, I think, deserved it. So I think Tony was right. It was a little bit biased towards Tony, I think, but whatever. Hey, Tony knew how he performed. He didn't feel like that they did their best. So whether or not the other people, the judges could see it, I don't know. But I think him giving the trophy away, I think that was the right thing to do. It was the right thing to do in his heart. Let's say that.
yeah, and I think again, it was all part of like this. As I said, this was I looked at this movie as a character study, and it was you're not supposed to see like unbelievable growth in his character, but you see
Hmm.
some growth in his character as the movie goes on. So,
Yeah.
all right, you mentioned the Fifth of Beethoven, so that
Hmm.
was played just as they were entering the disco for the first time. They show everybody dancing to that song, and that was an earlier disco hit,
Yeah.
so it made sense that was part of it.
Yeah. That came out May of 76. So it was, totally way before the movie ever came out. It got up to number one. And of course, this is a disco adapt. They adapted the Fifth of Beethoven to this, so you're blending the classical with contemporary disco beat. Kind of a novelty hit, but I don't know. It seemed to hold that whole. I think it's a good representation of that disco feeling. Yeah, maybe it's a novelty hit, but it was a big hit. You couldn't escape it, and I think it fits perfectly on the soundtrack, and it fit well in the movie. Because everybody, when they're going into the club, people knew this song
Mhm.
already.
And
So it
and they,
gives you a bit of a familiarity to setting up the scene. So I still think it's a great, come on, disco track. It's a great track.
It was a great way to introduce the audience to the disco. And,
Mhm.
you know, for people today, if you watch this movie, the way that, well, that was a real disco in Brooklyn. And that is what how discos looked. It was the, you know, again, the lit up floor, the disco ball, the tables surrounding the disco. So yeah, that was just, and then that first scene of the disco, they played a number of songs.
Mhm.
So the next song that's on the album is Manhattan Skyline. This is just played for like a couple of seconds. It's just played when Tony tracks down Stephanie at the dance studio and asks her to dance in the contest with her. So I don't know much about the song.
I think
I
it's just a
identified it.
minor,
Yeah,
it's really a soundtrack song because it's just adding something to the scene. It's really a minor track. It's just an instrumental, just to accompany the scene. It's not a main track. That's all. It's fine. Nothing wrong with it. It's not very memorable,
no,
but it is what it is. It's in the film. They included it here. It's a soundtrack, so it's all fine.
Calypso Breakdown is actually not in the film. And I researched and researched and researched, said I can't find this song. And apparently it's not in the film. So on the soundtrack, not on the film. Night on Disco Mountain is in the film. That's when he and his friends go to the Brooklyn Bridge for the first time, and they're all like, you know, they're all like doing hijinks, and they're pretending for a net, like they fell off the bridge, and they're hanging off the bridge, and they're doing all this crazy stuff on the bridge. It was a foreshadowing type of moment because eventually one of the friends falls off the bridge
Yeah.
and dies. So that's what that scene was.
Right. Not a key track, but it's effective. It's good for the scene. I think a lot of these tracks fit the scene that they are being incorporated into.
Yeah, I mean, side one is is the original songs, and it's
Mhm.
typically the most memorable songs, except for the next one, because it might be the most memorable scene in the movie. It was an old song that was regurgitated for the movie, and that was the "You Should Be
Mhm.
Dancing," and that was the one that might have earned him the nomination. Typically, if I see one scene played from this movie, it's when the entire dance floor clears for Tony Manero, John Travolta, and I mean, if you want to see what disco dancing is, I mean, he nails that. He just
Oh,
crushes that.
big scene, big track, and they're reaching back to a song that was a hit, June of '76. So it was before that, but it's still, you go, oh, well, everyone knows this track. Big. It's got to number one. Very energetic, very danceable. You know, this is quintessential middle period Bee Gees. It is, you should be for God's sakes. It says disco, for God's sakes. It was a staple in discos, and I think defines the genre. There's a
Oh, for
lot of there's a lot of genre defining tracks on this record. This really, I'm going to go out on a ledge, but if you want to pick up some disco, you really could just pick up the soundtrack, and that's
absolutely.
all you would need. You could, that pretty much sums it up.
Well, they basically cover some very key disco groups on this album.
Hmm.
So they again they regurgitated "You Should Be Dancing" for the album, and then "Jive Talking" was also not in the movie. Apparently, that scene was cut. It wasn't the original, so there might be a director's cut out there with it. But those are both number one songs for the Bee Gees prior to the movie being released. But yeah,
Hmm.
here's an example. Casey and the Sunshine Band, Boogie Shoes. I mean, that was a huge hit.
1975.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I remember going to like parties when I was like a 19, when I was uh around 1974, 75, and you remember hearing songs like "Get Down Tonight" and "I'm Your Boogeyman," and that was
Mhm.
Casey and the Sunshine Band. They were one of the biggest disco bands out there. Everything they put out back then was number one. And as far as when it is played in the movie, uh, it's played when Tony goes to meet Annette prior to him dumping her for the contest, and they're about to go practice for the contest. So that's when
Yeah, a
it's
lot of this KC stuff, you could go on, this could be a show in itself. Is it funk? Is it disco? What is it? Is it just dance music? I always kind of looked at KC and Sunshine Band as kind of a funk band. But Boogie Shoes, was released in '75. It really didn't do a whole lot. But when it was in the film, it totally, you know, the inclusion on the soundtrack gave it totally new life, and Boogie Shoes became one of the best, biggest Casey and the Sunshine Band tracks. How could you not have? I mean, it's funky, it's upbeat, perfect for the dance floor, whether it's disco or funk. The thing with the funk thing is, funk and disco are just like, they're closely related. They're just like right on the edge. A lot of these disco songs could be considered funk. I don't know, but it's a great KC song. It's a classic. But
Yeah, and they after the disco era ended, they still continued to churn out hits. The biggest one I remember being "Cherish."
hmm
That was a really good song, and that was not a disco song.
yeah,
So now we go to side four. There's only really two songs to talk about here. So one of them is Salsation. What that was that was played in the first scene in the disco. What happens is that the DJ is playing like the more typical disco stuff, and Tony's out there dancing, and then they switch to this Latin style disco. So again, this is a foreshadowing thing.
hmm
Tony is mad. He's saying, "Well, what type of music is this?" But again, it's basically showing you that disco came in many different formats and many different genres, and he didn't know how to dance to that music. And then ultimately, as we know, what ended up happening was he ended up feeling like a Latin couple had beat him in the contest, even though he had won the contest. So that's what
right.
that was.
Yeah, it's fine. It's not anything. It's not a major work or anything, but it,
Yeah, it
it
was.
does, it just gives you a little bit more variety and exactly what you said. The whole disco movement can come in many varieties. And it's nice just to give a different flair to the film. So,
it's
no
it's
problem.
it's interesting to go through these soundtracks and sort of look, okay, where did they play these, and then it allows
hmm
us, me, to think about, okay, wait a minute, what is the point of these songs? And
Right.
as I said, I kind of see this as a foreshadowing type of move, and to help develop the plot and what eventually happens. So final song we'll talk about will be Disco Inferno. We both mentioned it. So this
Monster.
song was released, but upon re-release from the movie, it did reach #1 on the dance charts. It is one of my favorite songs in the movies. This one is used frequently throughout the film when they're in the disco. Basically, the way it works is that they enter the disco, the Fifth of Beethoven is playing, but then it's when Disco Inferno comes on. That's the first time you see Tony go on the dance floor, and then you basically see, okay, he's the king of the floor, and he takes the middle. He doesn't take over the way he did in the "You Should Be Dancing" part, but he's the main guy out there. The
Mm.
other and then the other performer who is also in this movie that went on to big things was Fran Drescher, and she was in a scene when the song was playing, and she ends up going up and dancing with Tony to Disco Inferno, I believe, in the second time they entered the disco. So this was, I think, I think the third most famous non-Bee Gees song to be in the film.
Big track came out October 76. It didn't do a whole lot, but it got up to number 11 because it was re-released in 78. So the film gave it a big boost
Oh,
because,
absolutely.
again, you think disco songs, Disco Inferno, you can't get any more disco than this. One of the most famous disco anthems ever. Um, Great beat, great vocals, and just for the fact that they included this on the soundtrack just kind of sealed its I don't want to say sealed its fate, but solidified this as a bona fide disco classic. It might have been different had it not been on this record, but this gave a lot of life to some older songs, and there's no doubt that it was a classic. I no doubt that this should have been on here, you know.
Oh, it was featured throughout.
Yeah.
And one other song that was not on the soundtrack but was in the movie, and I thought Travolta did a great job with it, is he did the disco duck dance. Do you remember the song "Disco Duck" by
Yeah, but
Rick?
I don't remember Disco Duck was in it.
The disco duck was in it, and actually John Travolta does disco duck extremely
Rick
well.
Dees. Now, why
Yeah.
wasn't Rick Dees in this? Well, in the soundtrack.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. Talk about novelty track. Hmm.
Yeah, but it was, I mean, back in the day, that was a fun little song. We used to like hearing that at parties and
Well,
stuff.
sure,
I
sure.
recall that. So that's Saturday Night Fever. Final thoughts and rating, Grant.
Oh, final thoughts and rating. This is quintessential disco. Like I said before, if you're looking to get into disco, you want a good sampling of it, this is really all you need. Yeah, there's other comps out there you could probably get. Um, I think if you're gonna get into it though, start off with this. This is so strong. This is a 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10 for me. This is, like I said, quintessential for any disco fan or any music fan or soundtrack, one of the greatest soundtracks. And the fact that it sold as well as it did, no doubt that it still is one of the most brilliant soundtracks ever made.
Yeah, and I would have to agree. I would go 5 stars with this. I mean, yeah,
Sure.
there's a couple of fillers in there and songs that aren't
But
really
still,
moving,
it's
but
a
still,
soundtrack movie. You're gonna have those, but it adds some depth to the soundtrack, and none of it's offensive. In all honesty, everything that's on here is good. You know,
oh
if you
yeah, I
love the
agree.
movie, you can identify with it. Um, yeah, it's classic, you know.
But that side one is just what a fantastic side one. One
Yeah.
song after another that's just great. And I'll also tell you, I don't know if you ever saw the sequel. I think the sequel gets a
Oh
bad rap.
God.
The soundtrack and the movie, I actually liked it, but that's for another day. But I have to say, especially I actually did
Mhm.
quite like the Staying Alive soundtrack. I really did. Thought there's a lot of good music on that.
God, that was like 83 or something. I haven't seen it
Oh,
in years. I
yeah, something
really
like that.
couldn't. I probably saw it. I do believe I saw it in the theater, but that was the last time I saw it, and I don't couldn't tell you one thing about it.
Yeah, no, I actually thought it was a pretty good movie and a pretty good, it kind of took you on, it continued the story arc of Tony Manero, and I thought it was a
Hmm.
fair story arc, given where he was at the beginning of that movie, what he ended up doing. And again, you saw a little bit of character development. They didn't go like extreme and make it that, he was like some kind of like hero and wonderful guy
Hmm.
or anything like that. But he's his life has a journey and it takes you on that journey. So anyway,
There you go.
okay, well, anything else, Grant?
Nope. That pretty much sums it up. I love this. Didn't love it when I was a kid. Love it now. So,
Well,
what can I
thanks for
say?
being on tonight's show. Please make sure to watch Grant on Grant's Rock Warehouse and the Contrarians. He does some great shows, he talks about all kinds of music on Grant's Rock Warehouse. With the ones I'm on, he tends to have me more on the mainstream stuff.
Okay.
When he talks about some different type of music, he brings up all kinds of bands that you might want to hear about, um, things that you might not have ever heard of, but he knows about all kinds of music. So thank you again for being on the show.
Okay. A lot of
And
fun.
that was episode 4. We're looking forward to the next one. The next one I am planning to do is the Wizard of Oz. So I'm planning to go way back because I haven't done an oldie yet. So let's go for a real oldie.
Might as well.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
All right.